Washington National Airport, south of airport aircraft noise and mitigation study. I'm Dawn Hawkins Nixon with the Prince George's County Department of the Environment, serving as a member of the South of Airport committee group. So with this overview or very quick introduction to the meeting this evening, I'd like to turn this over to our director, Andrea Crooms, to offer the county's welcome. Andrea?
Thank you so much, Dawn. And thank you. I'm excited about folks joining this meeting. Welcome to this being the community meeting for Prince George's County, specifically for the South of Airport Aircraft Noise and Mitigation Study. This is the final public meeting. It is a project kickoff public workshop for us to discuss the study and the work that's been done so far. There are actually two studies, so I want to talk a little bit about that history. So there was a north of DCA study that handled the area of Montgomery County and Arlington County. And this working group that are the folks who are going to present to you today were very helpful in terms of getting a report out and getting recommendations that the FAA has worked to implement and are testing to improve aircraft noise north of the airport. We are on the other side of the airport, right? And so many of our communities, but specifically Fort Washington and Accokeek, are impacted by both arrivals and departures from DCA. This study, which includes all of the areas south of the airport, includes the city of Alexandria, Fairfax County, and Prince George's County. We've all gotten together to hire Vianair to conduct a similar effort to what they did north of the airport. The goal is really to reduce our noise impacts. Today we're going to hear about what they have evaluated so far in their study. There's going to be an opportunity for you to engage and ask questions about the progress of the study, as well as give your own input. And there's also going to be a follow-up opportunity because we have a survey that is live that you can give more in-depth commentary on, or once you have a chance to digest the study, can give your reactions to on the study website. And we're going to continue to provide that survey information through the end of July. So both you will have the opportunity to learn about this here. There will be a Q&A published based upon your questions today and any questions that you give during the survey period. And you have the opportunity to both give commentary here and ask any questions that you have. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the Vianair folks who are going to give us an overview of what's going on in the study so far.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Allardyce. I am the Chief Consulting Officer for Vianair, and the Jason Schwartz is here with us, and he is our environmental guy and our public outreach guy. And I'm just going to let him start out through the agenda and move into the rest of the presentation. So I'll just kick it over to Jason.
And I'm sorry, Jason, just one other note is that if there are any elected officials or representatives of elected officials, you can please drop your name and what office you're with in the chat so we can acknowledge you. And also, if you have questions as we go along, you can be dropping those in the chat so that folks can be figuring out how to either answer those in the presentation or at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Thank you. Sorry, Jim.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for dialing in for this. We are excited to give you this first public briefing on the effort to address noise impacts for communities south of the airport. Real quick, as you can see on the agenda, we'll go through a brief overview of the project itself, kind of what's involved, why we're doing it, what we're doing, and then we'll talk about some of the components of that of the project. Baseline assessment will be a big portion of what we discussed today. Then we'll talk about the community engagement and public input opportunities, both for tonight as well as for the rest of the project. And then we'll go through the design team, next steps. And again, as was mentioned, we'll have an opportunity at the end for both community input and Q&A. I think what we're going to do is start with Q&A, and then we'll have which will be looking at the chat boxes for your questions. So if you could put them up in there, that would be greatly appreciated. And then toward the end, we will have a community input, community comment opportunity as well. So a little history, as was mentioned, Vianair did some work with Arlington and Montgomery counties to address community noise impacts on the north side of DCA. Obviously, and you guys are more expert than we are on the fact that noise or aircraft noise has been an issue and a concern for communities on both north and south and probably east and west of the airport for decades. The Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority developed a community working group to help bridge the gap, I think, between industry and the airport and the FAA and communities that are impacted by aircraft noise. That's called the CWG. So throughout this presentation, we'll talk about the CWG or the DCA CWG, and that's this community working group. The community working group has two subcommittees, one of which was already mentioned, the North of Airport Subcommittee. Again, we worked with them to address noise impacts on the north side of DCA. And subsequently, we were contacted by Alexandria, as well as Fairfax County and Prince George's County, to look at noise impacts on communities south of the airport. And that's what we're here to talk about today. In general, a lot of the research that we did for this initial effort was downloaded or obtained through the MWA or the DCA website. So I provided a link there at the bottom in case you want to look at information about the community working group and the DCA noise program. Anytime that we rely heavily or pulled heavily from an outside source, we will include a note on that slide so you can visit for yourself and look at the materials that we referenced for the study. So the project is broken up, generally speaking, into four components. The baseline assessment is where we look at the current conditions and then how did we get to where we are today. So in the context of this work, we're looking at what are the current noise impacts that the community is most concerned with. Again, we're looking at south of the airport. So for communities to the south, what are the current noise concerns or the primary noise concerns? And then historically, how did we get to where we are today? So what has happened to increase noise issues or concerns for the communities that we're working on behalf of? Component two is noise abatement, and that's where we will use the information we glean in the baseline assessment to say, okay, here's the noise issues, here's the cause of those noise issues, and how can we best address those. Typically, or generally speaking, we're looking at changes or revisions in the current airspace and the flight procedures in and out of DCA to relieve some of those noise impacts to the communities. Component three, community outreach and engagement, is really a core part of this effort. I'll note that these project components are not sequential, right? So the community engagement and outreach piece goes from start to finish of the project. We are throughout the project looking for ways to get community input. I'll talk about some of those as we move forward, but that's definitely a critical part of this. This project is based rooted in community outreach and community engagement, and really addressing the issues that the community, the impacted communities in particular, are experiencing. So we want to know directly from those impacted what those impacts are, and then we'll share with you some of the solutions that are being proposed in order to address those. And finally, advocacy and implementation support simply means working with the key stakeholders that we need to get support from. So that would be the airport or the airport authority, the FAA, perhaps the airlines and other partners, in order to take these recommendations, and we'll advocate on behalf of the community to get some of these changes implemented to reduce noise impacts for those communities. Next slide. So just for orientation, if you take a look at the graphics on the bottom right side, you'll see the airport layout. So you've got runways 1 and 19. There's numbers at the end of each runway. Just for orientation, I want to note that each runway, so you can see there's a bunch of numbers at each end of each runway. We've got either a single or a pair of numbers. So for example, runway 1, which you can see the number 1 on the south side of that graphic, and number 19, that would be a single runway, but it's got two different directions. So from an aviation perspective, we would consider it 2 runways, but for the sake of this discussion today, we're kind of looking at it as 1 runway. So if I talk about runway 1, I'm talking about that runway that you can see with the 1 It's also runway 19. The difference is, from an aviation perspective, if you're taking off from runway 1 to the north, then you would be using runway 1. If you turn around and you're basically taxiing or driving or landing in the opposite direction on that same pavement, then it would be considered runway 19. We will refer to these off and on throughout the presentation, so it's important that folks are at least a little bit familiar with what we're talking about. In terms of the study, we will be looking primarily at, like I mentioned, that runway 1 with aircraft landing to the north along runway 1. That results in arrivals going over the communities to the south. So that is a major focus of what we're looking at. Runway 33, which you can see on the southeast, same thing. If you're landing on runway 33, you're arriving over communities to the south, and similarly, runway 4. But runway 1 is the primary arrivals runway, and runway 33 is sort of a secondary runway where you'll end up with arrivals over the south communities. Similarly, and we call that a north flow, when airplanes are moving from south to north. So in this case, they're landing from the south and departing to the north. We call that a north flow, and the opposite flow obviously would be the south flow. And you can see again with the green lines going to the south, if an aircraft is departing to the south, this would be on runway 19. That would result in departing aircraft overflying those communities to the south. So it's a little bit confusing. This is all covered in the baseline report that accompanies this presentation that you can download on our website. It'll explain it a little bit more, but we just want you to be familiar with, basically, if you're in a north flow aircraft or arriving from the south, departing in a northward direction or taking off in a northward direction, those arrivals will overfly the south of airports communities. And in a south flow, it's the departures that will overfly those communities to the south. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, component 2, noise abatement. This involves identifying, analyzing, and proposing ultimately strategies to reduce community impacts for those communities to the south. So this will include, like I mentioned, primarily changes in the airspace and or changes in flight procedures. So arrivals and departures, and again, focusing on those communities to the south. The noise abatement recommendations will be developed by a design team. And that design team is actually made up of representatives from the community working group. So typical projects like this would be the work is done by industry professionals. So maybe the FAA and or the airlines. Our approach is a little bit different on this project. We're really working with community members who know what the impacts are and perhaps can give us more of a local awareness of what's happening, and then can reflect on the recommendations that come out. So Vionair works with the design group as the subject matter expert, but we're really pulling from the local expertise to help us come up with what do we need to solve and how to best solve that. Recommendations from the design group will be presented to the community working group for review and approval, and then ultimately it'll be forwarded on to MWA, the airport authority, who will then send it to the FAA for review and hopefully implementation. Component 3 is community engagement, as I mentioned, and also, as I noted, community engagement is really a core component to this effort. We've got a number of public meetings to keep the community advised and informed of what's going on. We also have tools to not only inform, but to collect input on the project as we move forward. So first, there's a dedicated project website. You can see the link to it there. It's at vionair.com/SOA for South of Airport. The website has information about the project, meetings, summaries, things of that nature, exhibits, so that the public can be aware of what's going on and then hopefully use that to provide feedback to us. The website also includes a dedicated project email, which we ask that you use if you have questions related to the project. Could be comments, could be recommendations or suggestions. We're open to that feedback. So please do use that email address. We've also launched a community engagement survey with the intent of collecting input from residents. The survey link is also provided there. That survey has been open since, I want to say April 1st. We plan on closing the survey July 31st. So you've got about 5 weeks left to participate in that, and your input is appreciated. So please do log into that website or that link, excuse me, and provide your feedback. There's also an opportunity in that survey to provide any additional questions or input that you have. There's a free form question in there as well, so you can add any comments that you deem appropriate. Next slide, please. Advocacy and implementation, like I said, this is primarily to help with the advocacy and engagement with the industry stakeholders who need to approve or support the recommendations that come out of this project. So if we come up with a revised, say, arrival procedure into DCA, into the airport, that will go to MWA for review and hopefully their support, and then they have to send it on to the FAA. So just the way the system works, the airport needs to be supportive, or at least not opposed to any recommendations that come out of this effort in order for FAA to consider it. So we will work, and we are working with MWA to make sure that they're comfortable with what we're recommending. And then ultimately it'll go to the FAA for review. They'll make sure that it can be done safely, and then they will ultimately implement. So the role of Vioneer will be to follow that through the process and make sure that we address any issues that come up and keep the project moving through, or the recommendations through implementation. We also assist the steering committee. I will get into a little bit more detail later, but we assist the steering committee as well with any engagement that they need, whether it's with FAA, MWA, the community working group, etc. And finally, we will participate in the FAA's performance-based navigation implementation process, which is a mouthful. But basically, that's the group that will look at the recommendations that come out of the project and assess whether or not it could be implemented without any negative impact to the national airspace system and any impacts, obviously, to safety. Next slide, please. I mentioned participants and stakeholders. There's a lot of them here. I'm not going to go through in great detail all of these, but just to kind of give you a high-level overview, I'll start from the top. That's our project steering committee, and those are the jurisdictions that have contracted with Vioneer to move forward this effort. So Prince George's County, Fairfax County, and City of Alexandria working together, and we are working on their behalf to come up with the solutions to address some of these issues. The project design team, as I mentioned, is made up of community working group representatives. So these are all folks that are actually residents. They're not, they're resident representatives. They're not government officials. It's not FAA, which is sometimes what communities get frustrated with, that they don't have a voice in the process. And here, the community is really the central voice in what's driving the recommendations. The Federal Aviation Administration, like I mentioned, will ultimately have to approve, and they will implement the recommendations that come forth. We've had great success working on similar projects across the US, so we're confident that we will be able to make some important changes here that will reduce impacts for you all. The DCA Community Working Group, I mentioned, those are residents who represent the communities surrounding the airport. We're specifically working with the South of Airport group right now. Ultimately, the entire community working group will review and approve the proposal or the proposed recommendations that come out of the effort. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, again, they don't have an active role in this. However, they will be sort of a silent partner in ensuring that what we provide, they're comfortable with and willing to support and submit ultimately to the FAA for their review and implementation. And finally, I mentioned community and impacted residents. You're really the core of this project and making sure that we understand what those issues are from your perspective, from the boots on the ground perspective, and then also to evaluate the recommendations that come out of the project before it moves forward. Next slide, please. Steering committee membership, as I mentioned, these are representatives from the local jurisdictions. The steering committee is actually made up of staff from the jurisdictions that we're working with, and they basically provide project direction and oversight as we move forward. So they give us the direction, and they help us keep the forward momentum with the project. Next slide. Our project design team is really another core component of what we do. I mentioned that this is made up of CWG representatives. Also, these are citizens as opposed to government officials. So we're working directly with impacted community members. You will see that a couple of these members have professional aviation experience, which does somewhat enhance the inputs, right? Because they can help us or they can extend their expertise to the community working group and to the design team discussions. However, their job is to represent their community or their jurisdiction as opposed to their industry or their employer in this particular effort. Okay, design philosophy. So the design team, the first step for the design team is to help us decide what are the priorities, right? So anytime you, or typically when you address aircraft noise, you're moving airplanes from an airplane noise from one area to another, right? As long as the airplanes are flying, there's going to be noise. And so the scope of our work is really about managing the impacts within the current level of operation at DCA. Our job is not to shut down the airport or to cut operations. That's not within our purview. So really what we want to do is figure out how can these airplanes operate or where can they operate in a way that reduces noise for impacted communities. So the design philosophy kind of gives us that set of goalposts that we need to strive for. And it's in a prioritized list. So you can see there 1 through 5. And basically what we try to do is say at the end of the project, when the recommendations are done, we'll go back and we'll look at this list and make sure that it's consistent with that design philosophy. We do that in order to keep the focus on really a holistic approach to the project, right? If you've got people working on a project to reduce noise, what you don't want is, let's say I'm part of the project committee or the design group. You don't want me there saying, well, put it over, Jim's house, just don't put it over my house. That's not going to solve the noise issue. So what we try to do is we look at this more holistically to say, okay, where should we move the noise? Or if we can't, first we want to minimize it, of course, and if that can't be done, where do we put it to minimize the impacts? So the top priority in the design philosophy right now is maximizing flights over the Potomac River and compatible areas, including industrial areas, major highways, and use corridors, utility corridors. So basically what that means is go back to pre-2015, which I'll get into a little bit later. But back before 2015, what we're hearing and what we've heard from the community is aircraft were more centered over the center of the Potomac River, more so than it is today. So one of the priorities, or the priority, is to keep it over the river and over the center of the river as much as possible. When you can't do that, look for other areas such as an industrial area, major highway, areas that are non-residential, maybe not as noise sensitive. So following that, if we can't put it over the river or segments of the flight procedures, if they can't be over the river, what should we do? We'll maximize the altitude, which makes great sense. Going a little bit further, use of an optimized profile descent was recommended. I won't get into the details of that, but basically that would reduce noise impacts. It would raise the altitude and reduce the noise exposure for aircraft on arrival. Increasing trek variability. So one of the things that we've heard is the concentration of flights, especially over residential areas, is causing an increase in impact. So reducing the concentration by increasing track variabilities is another priority. Avoid disproportionate impacts to any single entity. That basically means try to make sure that no one jurisdiction is being more impacted than others. So we're not sort of dumping all the noise on one community. And then finally, minimize overhead flights of noise sensitive areas such as schools, hospitals, churches, et cetera. And the one caveat I'll say here is the design philosophy is sort of right now, it's sort of in a draft form. This is what the design group is working off of. However, the community engagement survey, as well as these public meetings, are an opportunity for us to collect additional public input. That input will be summarized for the design group, and then this design philosophy may be modified to match up with the design philosophy may be revised to match up with the input that we got. So if there's something contrary, like for some reason people want or seem to prioritize things differently, that information will be given to the design team, and they can revise the design philosophy as appropriate. All right, next slide. This gets us into the actual findings from the baseline assessment. So we'll get into some operational data, as well as some noise or acoustic data over these next few slides. So just in general, that left picture, general study area, that's intended to kind of give you an idea of the area that we're looking at. So you can see DCA, the little blue airplane on that graphic. And again, our focus is basically south of that. So any area that you see south of that airport is generally within our study area. Again, you see the operational flows, just as a reminder. Landing in the red lines, or the red arrows, excuse me, show landing aircraft. So arriving on 4-1 or runway 33 has arrivals over the south of airport communities, and the departures there in green are off of runway 15, 19, or 33. Sorry, 15, 19, or 22. Those would be departing, and the departures are what's going to overfly the communities to the south. One thing below the graphics, you will see a link to the DCA noise information web pages. That most of the operational and acoustic data that we got, since we're looking historically, came from DCA, and so if you want to review their reports, you can do so via that link. Next slide, please. All right, so again, the baseline study is meant to kind of look at, okay, where are we in terms of noise impacts? What's causing the greatest impact to the communities? And then historically, how did we get here? Did something change to increase the noise complaints and the noise concerns within the community? So we started with looking at noise complaints. I went back to 2013, and you can see they're fairly flat between 2013 and 2014. But then around 2015, things start to increase fairly substantially. So from 2015 to 2018, you see growth. And then from 2018 to 2019, a huge jump. And then, of course, COVID happened, right? So COVID was the best thing to happen to aircraft noise since the Wright brothers, I think. Obviously, that cut down on noise complaints, cut down on noise. However, the question that we had is what happened in 2015 that would cause those complaints to start to spike? So that's kind of where we started in our investigation. Next slide. So one thing we would have thought was, okay, 2015, there must have been an increase in operations, right? More airplanes, more noise. So we looked at total operations from 2013 on, and we didn't see any change in total operations. It dipped a little bit in 2014, and then it was fairly flat again until 2019, and then 2020 happened with COVID and the lockdown. So there was a significant reduction. And then since 2021, it's kind of been climbing, and it's pretty much back to, as of 2024 year to date, it looks like it's back to pre-COVID levels at this time. So operations or total operations don't seem to be the core issue that caused the complaints and the concerns that we're seeing today. Next slide. So then we looked at runway use, and this is where it's helpful if you have a little bit of knowledge or understanding of the runways. We looked at runway use, and the primary arrival runway at DCA, like I mentioned, is runway 1. And you can see there, runway 1 is 60% of the arrivals across from 2015 to 2023. 60%-ish were on runway 1, and that was fairly flat. I looked at departures as well, again, about 60%. And again, that curve is fairly flat. So sometimes you'll see an airport either expanded a runway or closed a runway, or something happened with runway use, shifting aircraft to a different runway than maybe was used historically. And that can bump up complaints because you're moving airplanes over a different community than you were before. But that wasn't evident here for DCA. So runway use was not the issue as far as we can tell. Next slide. So shifting, so operationally, we didn't really see much that would explain it. So then we switched over to looking at noise data. For this, for the historical analysis, again, we leveraged MWA's noise monitor array that they have around the airport. For our work, specifically on the south side, we looked at these 5 noise monitors. You can see which city and jurisdiction they're located in that table below. And this will just give you an idea of the source of the noise data that we looked at. So the noise monitors for DCA, for anyone not familiar, those are operated and maintained by DCA, and that noise data from the, sorry, I'm getting comments that keep popping up my screen and I can't see it. That records noise data associated with DCA airport operations, and then that data is available through the MWA website for anybody that wants to look at it. It's also reported out in some of the reports that you will find if you go back to that link that I had provided earlier. Next slide. So this is where things start to get interesting. So monthly noise events were the first thing that we looked at, and a noise event in this context is just, it's an aircraft noise event, right? So each monitor is out there, and basically if it hears an airplane go by, or if there's noise produced by an aircraft overflight, it will count that as a noise event. So looking, say, at 2015, the blue line, noise monitor NMT, it's noise monitor terminal number 8, which is in Alexandria, that recorded, looks like approximately 12,000 events, 12,000 events at that particular monitor. That's a monthly average. So the average month, you had 12,000 noise events that were captured by that monitor. If you look at the lines below that one, all of the noise monitors are represented there, and they're all fairly flat. Again, there doesn't seem to be any major bumps up or down until you get, of course, to COVID, and that threw everything off. Next slide. This is where we noticed we got some interesting data. So this is where we looked at not the number of events or the number of flights that the noise monitors identified, but rather the noise exposure level. So how much noise was produced. And as we talked about previously, the total operations were fairly flat. So you have, generally speaking, you have about the same number of operations, you have the same number of noise events, but if you look on this graph from 2014 to 2015, you can see all of the top 4 curves bump up from 2014 to 2015. Unfortunately, that noise monitor number 19 for Fairfax County data was not available. MWA had omitted the data for that particular monitor because of technical issues. But the other 4 show a pretty consistent story that between 2014 and 2015, the total noise exposure did increase in that time period. So then the question is, okay, well, why? And we'll get into that shortly. Next slide. Okay, and Jim will actually address specifically what happened in that 2015 time period that caused the increase in noise exposure and I believe subsequently the increase in noise complaints. Jim?
So give Jason a chance to get a sip of water because I'm sure he's getting a little cotton mouth going now. Been talking the whole time. So in pre-Metroplex, and this picture on the left was taken in 2011, what the primary navigation aid was the VOR or the VOR DME that sits on the field at DCA. And what that is, it's an Omni range that has 360 radials that go out. And they picked a radial that went basically right down the middle of the river. So this is depicting departures off of runway 19 primarily, and some off of runway 15 that would depart to the south and turn to join that radial. And at the time, there was a rule in place, a local rule in place that said that the aircraft should not turn until they're at least 5 miles from the airport or 3,000 feet, whichever comes first. So what ended up happening was these aircraft would stay down the center of the river, and you can see the flight tracks are showing there's a little bit of river that you can see underneath these flight tracks between the shorelines on either side here. And then once they got down across the bridge is where they would start dispersing. And because they climbed at different rates, they were turned at different places depending on where they're going. So predominantly west flow here, to the east and northeast here, and to the southeast here. But you can see it's a fairly broad splay of aircraft. So post-Metroplex, 2015 after this, and this slide was taken in 2016, you can see how this goes from very dispersed out here to very concentrated. So if you happen to be living underneath one of these specific tracks, it got very, very concentrated over your house. The other thing that they did was in the pre-Metroplex, they had the option to vector these aircraft to turn the aircraft to these headings as soon as they needed to for separation standards. But one of the things they were trying to achieve with this design was higher throughput. Unfortunately, it did not work because of the way that the design was actually done. And it's just a technical reason why that didn't work. But they're trying to have two tracks off of here that diverge that allows them to keep the throughput up with the airport. And that's very important to the FAA. Always efficiency is very important to the FAA and safety is very important to the FAA. So one of the stated reasons for going to RNAV, or Area Navigation Departures, which is a satellite-based departure system as opposed to a ground-based navigational aid system, is that these aircraft can fly a route that is predictable and repeatable. That adds to the safety of the NAS, and in this case, with the addition of an additional route, can add to the efficiency of the system as well. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was, instead of the aircraft staying in the middle of the river, they started kind of getting closer to each side. So I know there was a big impact to Alexandria, because it gets like right over their shoreline. But this stream that goes down here into the east and down here into the southeast got very, very concentrated, as opposed to what had happened prior to the Metroplex changes in 2015. So that's just kind of a quick overview of what the change was and why the concentration happened, and why this kind of helps make sense to us about why those noise monitors up here started picking up higher level of noise impact, and it was due to the concentration and where the tracks moved. So one of the things that we are looking at for the baseline assessment was where the airplanes fly today. Most of the aircraft on arrival, this is like Jason was telling you, north flow, south flow. Most of the aircraft on arrival, these pink slides, and you can see in here, are coming in and they're being vectored to the final. So you do have track variability out here on either side because they're not just coming over the same track all the time. They're going up and down this kind of ladder out here, but once they get in on the final, they start getting concentrated again. Some of that is unavoidable, but some of that can be mitigated. One of the things that we look for is, as we were talking about, the optimized profile descent. If the aircraft stay out here further and higher and can glide down the glide path as opposed to being driven around at very low altitudes where they have to maintain thrust, then it's going to be quieter. So if we can get some of these aircraft coming in from the southwest to be able to glide down this glide path, that's what the optimized profile descent is about. This is an area of concentration where aircraft go direct to a fix south of the airport. The fix is called Katrin. You may or may not have heard about it, but that causes some concentration in the area of Akakik. So the green in this also is the departures northbound. Now you go over this side, you just flip everything around. So pink is still arrivals, green is departures, and then you can see again the same concentration that that we saw on the previous slide. So this was a typical or a sample day in 2023. Just kind of give you an overview of the total operations. In this, this is south flow departures, and when we looked at the noise complaints, these communities that are highlighted here had higher levels of noise complaints. It makes kind of sense when you take a look at where they are in proximity to the routes. So Fort Washington, you know, they're getting the departures out here. They're also kind of getting some of the arrivals over here. We'll show that here in a minute. Down here at Waldorf, Alexandria, of course, they're right along the river, and Springfield, they're getting some of the stuff out to the west. So this route right here, if you remember the previous slide, the flight paths over this area are now much more concentrated than they were. So it makes sense that this fits with the data that we're seeing. Again, on the arrival side, you can see where the same communities are, and we put a couple extra ones in there that have similar experiences with the arrivals as they do with the departures. In this case, a lot of these are because the aircraft are coming in at such low altitudes and being turned on to the final from both sides, and out here as well, because a lot of the aircraft are taken down to 4,000 feet or below, and we've seen on this side like 2,500 or even lower than that on this side coming in, and that definitely will get your attention when they come over your house that low. So one of the goals is going to be to see what we can do on the arrival side of the airport to raise the altitude of the aircraft as much as possible. And that should help mitigate some of the noise that we were looking at there. So back to Jason.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So yeah, going back to community engagement, again, really a critical part of this work, and we want your participation. So I just plugging the survey again at the bottom of that green box, you can see the survey link. So please use that and provide your input. And also in that green box, we have the project team email. So if you email us at soa@vioneer.com, we can address any questions or comments you have. And we have the project website listed there as well. So we really want to keep the community informed as much as you want to be and engaged as much as you want to be as well. So the project website was launched in early April. We're continuing to populate that with documents and exhibits as we move forward. The project email I mentioned, soa@vioneer.com, and the community engagement survey was launched on April 1st. We plan on closing that July 31st. After that, that data will be summarized. We will produce a report and put that online on the website, as well as provide that to the design team so they can consider that input that we received in the work that they're doing. Next slide. Other public meetings. Obviously, today is our first. It's the project kickoff for Prince George's County. The next one will be at end of the week, City of Alexandria on June 27th. And then we've got a similar presentation plan for Fairfax in July. The date's yet to be determined. After the project kickoff is where we sort of introduce the project. Then we will have a second or a follow-up set of meetings for the design group recommendations review. So that's where we'll take the design group proposals, the strategies, whether it's airspace or flight procedures, and we'll do a similar either single meeting or number of meetings for the public to introduce those solutions to you and to, again, get public feedback on those recommendations. That data will be then brought again back to the design team, and they may reconsider some of the recommendations that were developed based on your input. And then finally, once the recommendations are finalized, we will bring those to the community working group for an official review and vote. Hopefully the CDWG will accept them as is. If they have requests or recommendations, we may bring that back again to the design team. But ultimately, the final proposal will be introduced at the at the DCA community working group meetings, which are open to the public. We will note that on our website when we are planning to present to the CDWG, so everyone is aware and can join or log in for that meeting. Next slide. And finally, next steps, we've got, as I mentioned, two remaining meetings, City of Alexandria and Fairfax. Once those meetings are completed, we will compile the input that we receive, again, along with the survey, and all of that information will be used by our design team in addressing the noise complaints and noise impacts for our communities to the south. Once that's all done and packaged up, it goes to MWA for a final sort of review and sign off. And then they will submit it to the FAA for FAA's final review and implementation. There's a lot of steps to this, but we are quite confident that we will get it through the process, and the results will be better quality of life for communities to the south. I think with that, we are. You could switch to the next slide. This is again reference to the website, the project email for questions and feedback, and the community engagement survey. This PowerPoint will be made available via the website probably within the next day or two. So if you can just remember vioneer.com/SOA, you will get to the website, and then you can then you'll see the project email, obviously, and the surveys listed there as well. So I think that concludes what we had to present. I think next we'll switch to the next slide. We were going to start with questions, and I think we're going to go through the questions that were submitted via the chat. We will answer those. Then we will switch to public comment after we address the questions.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. What we can do is focus on the questions first, and then we'll have an opportunity for folks to share their experiences and make those comments. It will just make it a lot easier rather than having folks give comments and then come back. They get more input from a question and kind of go on from there. So if folks can respect that process, I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, if I can find the unmute button, we'll get started with this. So bear with me as I just go through the questions that have been put into the chat. And then we will try to answer them based on who it relates to the most, whether it's myself, Jason, or the county itself. The first question was, I was wondering if the noise from Andrews is included in the studies. Flight from Andrews fly directly over our homes. So the answer to that is yes and no. From the noise perspective, the software that we use does take into account all flights in the vicinity of the airport. However, the CWG only addresses, the community working group only addresses DCA traffic. So the scope is only for arrivals and departures to DCA. The next one was, what is preventing aircraft from remaining over the Potomac River for landing and takeoffs to the south of DCA? One of the things we will be looking at is, per the design philosophy that we talked about, was trying to make the aircraft fly over the river more. So it's, and I'll just caveat everything I'm going to say from here on out. There is no silver bullet. It's not, there's nothing that's going to eliminate all aircraft noise, but what we're going to try to do is mitigate the noise as much as possible so that we have a reduction in impacts to your neighborhoods. And one of the things that we're going to try to do is get the aircraft centered over the river more. Let's see. Said, what real-time tools are available to report loudest aircraft? Flight Radar 24 is great for flight details, but can't be sent quickly to FAA and others. There are apps available out there. I think you can Google different apps that you can use and or get a subscription to that has the ability to do instantaneous reporting. One of the things that I will say is that during the course of this project, we have been doing monthly reports on noise impacts to the various communities. What we do is we take our software and we set out a grid, and we have a very broad grid that we use to assess noise impacts, and we use various different metrics to assess noise impacts to the communities. These reports, these monthly reports, will be made available on the website. I encourage you to come back early and often to the website over the next weeks and months as we populate it with more and more information, as that information is releasable to the public. Everybody in the design group and the counties have to take a look and assess the information first so that they can use that, and then we put it out to the public for you to digest. Again, whenever these things come out, if you have questions, there's an email link on the website that you can use to ask questions on virtually anything that's on there, and we will respond to you.
Hey, Jim, real quick, if I could add, regarding the real-time question, MWA, the DCA website includes a tool called WebTrack, where basically it's a real-time flight tracking system where you can log on and watch aircraft that are flying over either in real time or historically. So if you were woken up at 2 a.m, you could log into WebTrack. You can set the time, and then you can watch the aircraft that were flying at that time and figure out what it was that made the noise. WebTrack also includes the opportunity to submit noise complaints to MWA, which is some argue that yes, I will put a hyperlink to the WebTrack website. Some people have expressed concerns with, well, we complain to the airport does nothing, and I've heard that from communities across the country. It's not specific to DCA. FAA also receives complaints, and I can post the email address for FAA as well, but really the airport operator is the central point of contact for noise complaints. So WebTrack would be your best bet. And yeah, I will put a link to that in the chat box. Sorry, Jim.
That's quite all right. Jump in anytime. So there's a couple of asking about adding new routes to DCA, otherwise known as the perimeter rule. That is congressionally handled. I will say that historically, MWA in the meetings with the CWG has been on the side of maintaining the perimeter rule and not adding additional longer distance flights. Their position has been, as long as I can remember, that's what Dulles is for, right? So as far as I know, the CWG always acts on behalf of the communities where the perimeter rule is concerned. They voice their concerns consistently at the CWG meetings to say that they want to maintain the perimeter and they do not want to expand it. So I know that's a big concern with a lot of people, but I will just say that the community representatives that you all have very strongly advocate for not expanding the perimeter. Let's see. Asking for some paste. Let me see what I can find here. There's a lot of links going on here. There's one comment that says disappointing that so many of these maps cut Accokeek off. I will say that Accokeek is front and center in the consideration of the design team. We have very strong advocates on the design team for Accokeek. So Accokeek will not be left out in the cold, nor will any of the other areas, but that one was specifically there. Let's see what else I can find here. So there's a comment that said it would be nice if the arrival map tracks look more like departure map tracks. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but like I said, when we're doing these monthly reports that you see coming out, we're using live flight track data to produce these noise reports monthly. And when they're available on the website, you'll be able to see them in much greater detail and, zoom in and see what you need to see. One of the comments is talking about the arrivals flying very low at 2,500 feet or below. I've seen them actually go below 2,500 feet, especially on the west side of the final, the west downwind. That is absolutely something that we have been talking about and that we want to address. I think I feel confident that there will be some movement on that, and we have had some discussions with the FAA. They have some very particular requirements that they have as far as bringing aircraft into the airport, and they are not able to give a blanket restriction that says thou shalt not ever go below X altitude. And the reason for that is pure and simple safety. They have to be able to take the aircraft in at the minimum vectoring altitude, which is a minimum safe altitude that they can take aircraft down to. And they have to be able to do that from time to time. But our goal will be to organically raise those altitudes by amending the flight procedures to the place where it will be more likely for the controllers to bring the aircraft in at higher altitudes, because we're going to make it easier for them to do that. It's a little bit of a generic answer without getting too much down into the weeds, but that's our goal. Why can't departure flow going south track the river like it does going north? Well, the answer is it can, but should it? And so the design philosophy says keep the aircraft over the river as much as possible. Okay, but how far? How far south do we keep them over the river? So we're going to take a look at all of that to find out what the impacts are with various designs that we would use. And we're going to try to minimize the impact to as many neighborhoods as we possibly can. I know it's very important with the folks up in Alexandria to get the aircraft over the center of the river, but further on down the river, like Mount Vernon and stuff like that, they may not want the aircraft over the river down there. So we have to get input from all these different communities and find out what works best. I think the design team is well equipped to do that. Your citizen advocates have asked a lot of great questions. They've brought up different types of questions that they want answered. They're really, in my opinion, doing a great job advocating for you all. And all we're going to do is get more and better information as we go forward with the community surveys, with these public meetings, with these types of questions that you guys are asking. And I believe at the end of the process that whatever we come out with is going to be absolutely the best possible outcome that we can have with current technology and procedures, FAA rules and regulations. But I do believe that we can do basically the same thing on the south side that we did on the north side. I think that the end product that we came out with up there was as good as it gets with existing technology. I will say, caveat that again. Yeah, and that's, yeah, I will expand on that. The next question was, can you comment on the success that you had on the north side? Yes. So the north side was a bit of a challenge because of the prohibited airspace up there. So it really limited what we could do on the north side from the standpoint of where the aircraft have to go on departure, because they have to turn immediately off the departure end of runway 1 to the northwest to miss the prohibited area over the mall. And then they follow the river up to the northwest. One of the things up on the north side was, you have Arlington basically on the south or west side, and you have Montgomery on the north or east side. And so it was very important for them to keep the aircraft along the river corridor as much as they possibly could. We were able to take the flight procedures that existed, and we were able to move them more toward the center of the river. And it might have even just been a matter of feet, but we were able to move more toward the center of the river as much as possible. I mean, we actually ran into some roadblocks with the Secret Service in the prohibited areas as far as how far to the east we could move the route that goes by that prohibited airspace there. So sometimes we're handcuffed. We get as good as the best result that we can possibly get, but it's not, perfect. So sometimes it just depends on, what parameters you're set with. And sometimes you can't do what everybody wants you to do. But for the most part, we were able to keep everything right down the middle of the river for the departures. On the arrival side, there was a major change after 2015 that basically made one of those highways in the sky over a very densely populated area. And what we tried to do was modify the arrival procedures in such a way that the point at which the aircraft concentrate on the arrivals was over government land. And so we were able to move a fix in closer to the airport, have that fix become the primary or the initial approach fix for all of the approaches, and then have the controllers clear aircraft to that fix from various different directions rather than just down that rail, which is what they did historically. And what that does is that allows them to have some track variability up over the north and west areas there as the aircraft join the river. There may be some similar opportunities on the south side. We're looking into that, and we're taking a look to see what our options are. They have several different types of approaches on the north side. Those types of approaches, as in RNAV or RNP, required navigation performance, RNAV area navigation, ILS instrument landing system, visual approach. They have the river visual up there. You have one Mount Vernon visual down here. There are opportunities for those to be moved. And if it makes sense to move them, and the team concurs, and we get positive feedback from the public, then we will do that if it makes sense to do that. So it says there's a question there. Can we get today's recording? That's a question for the county.
Yes,
Couldn't find my
Boom.
mute quick enough, Sandra.
we will
That's all
share.
good. Let's see. I'm trying to see some of these other questions, kind of getting down towards the end here. It says, what app does Vianair use to monitor and report? We have our own software. It's called Airspace Information Management. Vianair AIM software is a multifaceted software that assists in flight procedure design, noise monitoring. We can do airport simulation. We do flight tracking and analysis. It's a phenomenal piece of software that assists us in being able to make these designs and assess the impacts. So we did use this software on the north side. We do use it at virtually every other project that we do that has noise. And then the noise reports that we will be putting out are done via this software as well. Let's see. It says, I imagine FAA will have a lot of pushback for approach and altitude. Yes, we did discuss that just a little bit. Again, I think that there's some room there for improvement. And, you know, if we are successful in, specifically for those of you that know where Katrin is, raising the altitude at Katrin, I believe what will happen is organically the aircraft will start coming in at higher altitudes. Again, I think that as long as a minimum vectoring altitude below 3,000 is available, that from time to time they'll bail out down that low. But what we hope to do over time is continue to change the culture to allow them to increase the altitude organically. And if we raise the altitude and design the procedures in such a manner that it's easier to stay higher, then I think there's going to be an opportunity for aircraft to come in higher on a more consistent basis. And that's what we'd be looking for. But why would we not push for a regulatory requirement of altitude rather than best practice or recommendation? Why can't we do the recommendation immediately and then start the rulemaking to make it a hard, fast rule? Well, I will say that it's pretty difficult to get the FAA to agree to a hard, fast rule in a case like this. And I've explained that a bit. You know, it may not be the answer that you want, but the fact of the matter is, the FAA is loath to restrict themselves, to handcuff themselves in any way as far as you know, their ability to manipulate the aircraft. And you know, because there's a myriad of reasons why you would have to do that. So the best long-term solution for this is like I said, is to try to design the procedures in such a way that it makes it easier for them to stay higher. And if we can do that, then I think it will happen organically over time. You can't make them do anything unless you do a you know, a congressional that goes in and does rulemaking, and that they pass a law that you have to do it that way. And the chances of that are slim and none. So I think for what we are able to do within the scope of this project, as I've described, our goal will be to raise the altitude to make it easier for the controllers to stay at higher altitudes, and continue to, through the CWG meetings, ask them to bring the aircraft in at higher altitudes if, you know, if at all possible. And I think that there'll be some movement that way. It may, like I said at the very beginning of this, there's no silver bullet. You know, I'm not going to promise you something I can't deliver, and I'm not going to tell you, you know, that the FAA will agree to do something. The best I can tell you all is, if we bring something to them notionally, if they don't hate it, then I can tell you all they don't hate it, and then it has to go through about 100 more people to get approved. So you know, like I said, we've had a lot of success with this methodology, and it may not seem like it's, you know, what you would want to hear, but I tell you, it's the only game in town. So we just play it as best we can, and so far we've been very successful, and we believe that that's going to happen down here on the south side as well. On January 22, you said the waypoints have already been determined and subsequently agreed. Okay, I don't think I understand everything I think I understand about this question. I'll just read it. It says, on January 23rd, you said that the waypoints had already been determined. Mike subsequently agreed. These were almost identical to the previous proposed that the FAA gave up on because of its significant effect on the 13 historic sites. Are you going to do noise studies, and will these be only census database? So yes, we're going to do noise studies. The recommendation, if I remember right, number 8 from the CWG had a layout of departure tracks to the south. Notionally, we have looked at those, and we are in the process of doing noise analysis on those now. And yes, we will use census data to take a look at the population impacts, but that's not the only thing we're going to look at. We have, you know, that's the beauty of actually having the local expertise, because they can tell us things that we can't glean from census data. They can tell us things, you know, like the history of the area, and why when you stand at Mount Vernon, you look across the river and you can't see any houses, but they're there. So there's a lot of local knowledge that we're gaining through the interaction with the design team and community members that, you know, otherwise we wouldn't know. So we're going to take all of that into effect. And again, I'll reiterate, your input from this meeting and from the website and from the survey and from subsequent meetings. Once we get done with our notional designs, we're going to bring them all back to you. And we're going to present you with the data. We're going to show you why we did what we did. We're going to show you alternatives that we considered. And then we're going to get your feedback and see if you have better ideas than what we came up with. So it's going to be a process to go through. But I think, like I said, at the end of the day, when we go to the CWG with the final recommendations, that it will be very well vetted, and I believe it'll be it will be the best that we could come up with existing technology, data, and local input. Let's see. The departures south should go at least as far over the river as they go north. Okay. We have that input. There's one question I'm going to have to answer later because I'm not sure I understand the whole thing. So I'll get some more context for that. It has something to do with the J40, but I'll get some more context to that.
That's my question, and we can come back to it. But really, I was trying to understand whether when the North study was done, there weren't the same set of rules, right? And now there's EJ40 rules, and because of the unique position that our community is, and we people have brought up to me whether there would be an opportunity. One, our greenhouse gas goals, right? So it's difficult for us to meet our greenhouse gas goals when airplanes are spewing greenhouse gases above our county. That actually impacts our goals, right? And we know that I think in America it's called optimized profile descent, is a major reduction in greenhouse gases in addition to the noise issues. And so I'm just thinking that there might be an angle to try to utilize EJ40, which is supposed to release the burden on those who've been most impacted by environmental injustices, which is kind of the definition of our county, right? In a lot of, you were talking about history, but a big piece of history is that a lot of folks who are here are either here because they were redlined or because their parents were redlined, right? And then you've got the fact that the U.S. Capitol utilized us as a dumping ground, both figuratively and in reality, and we suffer with those burdens of those environmental injustices. And then we have all the health impacts of the fact that so much transportation goes through our neck of the woods rather than them putting it somewhere else because there was just a willingness to impact us. In addition to the fact that we're on the East Coast and we are the southeast of the city, and there's a whole bunch of history that has to do with that as well. But I'm wondering if even though what we're talking about is noise, there is a reason why this is in the Department of the Environment, and a lot of folks have raised, can we put some of those arguments into this? Just if it's not part of the study itself in terms of getting the FAA to agree to, some of the proposals that you've made, some of the guidance that we would give to them, even though it's not regulatory, to say you're meeting these other guidelines and these other goals of the administration that include protecting in particular the residents who are, of Prince George's County, but are like residents of Prince George's County, right, who suffered those injustices. And, just kind of see if that kind of fits into things. That's something that's been raised to me a lot. And like I said, Department of Environment, I got to ask.
Yes, ma'am. So the short answer is yes, to the extent that it does not specifically involve reduction of particulate matter, because that's not within scope for us. Noise is, pollution is not. Like you said, some things kind of go hand in hand, like if you're doing optimized profile descents and they're doing idle thrust, then naturally they're producing less particulate matter because of that. So I think some of it kind of goes hand in hand. But as far as being a tasking for this group, the reduction of particulate matter is not part of the consideration. Other than that, the environmental justice matters are fair game for consideration in this. So yes, from that standpoint, that those things can be and will be considered.
If I may, I'm not sure the protocol here because I don't see a raise your hand button. But I wanted to really applaud Andrea's comments. I was involved with the MWA CWG early on when it was first established. The charter did not even include Prince George's County, and it was sort of an embarrassing, ooh, we forgot about those people. And then the charter was revised to include Prince George's County. So she's hitting the nail on the head here with this environmental justice and I raised once early on the institutional racism that seems to, when you run the data on just where complaints were coming from and who was paying attention to them. And until the counties got together, the jurisdictions got together and retained you, the FAA was sort of just summarily dismissing any ideas from the citizens that came up. No, we can't do that. And no explanation, no nothing. So I'm really hopeful that, I mean, we shouldn't have to hire you to talk to the government, but apparently we do. And
I believe we've had this conversation before, John.
right. I've been saying this now while Bill Parker's taken over, but it's I really do want to encourage you guys on the team to keep in mind. I mean, sort of one of the key factors of institutional racism is that nobody sees it. And with your expertise, hopefully you'll have those antenna up and be listening to folks like Andrea who can give you context for that. We don't want to be the dumping ground. And it was kind of interesting to me to see that on the listing of people involved in this from other jurisdictions, we have a former air traffic controller, a former airline executive, and citizens who don't have those credentials in Prince George's need to be given the same attention and weight and that sort of thing. So I'll shut up here, but I do want to encourage you to have those antenna up and make sure that those of us south of the airport are indeed treated fairly, and that's all. Thank you.
And you know, John, if you show up in these meetings and speak, you're going to get drawn right back into the CWG. You know that, right?
I hope not.
So just a format note, there is a raise your hand button. It's nestled in reactions. So I was about to tell folks, and you can go ahead and respond in a second, Jim, but I was about to tell folks if I think we reached the end of the question, so we can get folks raising their hand and then we can call folks in order. It actually gives me the order. So if we can do that, but sorry, Jim, you can respond.
No, that's quite all right. Would you like to do this portion, Director Crooms?
Sure, I can do that. I can.
Okay.
I see Paul Hertel has their name up, their hand up.
Thank you. I actually reside over in the Mount Vernon area and have been involved peripherally. And I mean peripherally because we have not been allowed to be part of the process. And throughout the process, we were told that the previous iterations, so the option 8 that you mentioned, that we were not going to be affected until the FAA came out with the studies and said, yeah, we were going to be affected. And one of the problems is when you fly down there repeatedly, they were warned that they were going to be affecting historic properties. And the original proposal that came up was actually had 13 106 processes that needed to be undertaken, which is why they didn't want to go through with it. Now, our concern down here has been that when they come down here, they then have to circle around us to get back to Dulles Airport waypoint to fly west. And so therefore we have a period of 2 minutes of noise, which is significant. And also in the studies, the FAA has a 65 decibel criteria, which is actually quite high. The original, it should be down to 55, which was the original EPA suggestion back in 1978. And so therefore, one of the key things is for us to be able to have input in this, which we have not here to, because the proposal has always been to remove it from where it is now and move it over our head. And so therefore, we've been kind of left out, even though everything we have said, or I have said, has been proven correct when the FAA's made its study. With regards to the previous comment, I worked on the Mirren power plant, and there, us as citizens, we had to do our own studies, we had to do our own work, and we managed to get that closed. So it is a difficult call. The other thing I would say is people mentioned pilots are involved. Yeah, I remember in flight school, the only noise advice we were told, which was actually an order, was do not fly supersonic over residential areas. And from that perspective,
We'll try to keep that going.
but you see, the problem has been when they did bring in a consultant from Brunel Care, all the way from Australia, and he said when he had worked on 200 airports, and he found that prolonged noise is actually more concerning than short. And I keep telling people, my wife and I, we lived at the end of the runway because Mirren Power Plant is at the end of the runway. We lived there for 23 years. And yes, it was very noisy, but it only lasted, I believe it or not, 7 to 10 seconds. Whereas down here, the noise lasts forever. And so it is problematic. And we have historic sites, and we also have the arrival route that flies right over our head. And it flies right over a Title I school. So so this is going to be a major concentration in our area. And I don't want to monopolize this, but I understand fully. And the last suggestion is noise. I think airplane noise and the effects on health effects are in its infancy in the scientific studies. They're kind of where when we started doing Mirren Power Plant, where particulate matter was, where the government didn't really understand fully the significance. And I don't think they fully understand the significance of having National Airport right in the middle of such an urban area. Thank you. That's my core. Oh, and the last question is, can I send comments to your website?
Yes, yes, just go to the website. You can either we encourage you to do the survey. There's a place within the survey that you can make comments, or you can use the email to send questions and comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and also, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of this project is now these communities do have input. The recommendations that go forward will go forward from the communities, not come from the FAA or any place else. The recommendations that go forward to the CWG for implementation will come from the communities. So now you do have advocates for you for all those things that you just were talking about. So again, you'll have another bite of the apple when the notional procedures are brought back to this group and the other groups, the other counties as well, to take a look at what the notional procedures are and how we arrived at them. And then you'll have another bite of the apple there to say, yes, that makes sense according to the design philosophy as amended, or no, it does not. So yes, I mean, that's the whole point of this, is for y'all to have input.
So I don't currently see any other hands raised. I want to give anyone a chance to try to raise their hand, and then if someone can't figure that out, we can also, because I know it's different on each app or if you're on your phone. But I want to, if anyone wants to make a comment, Stacy? Ms. Hartwell.
Hi. Thank you for this presentation. Can you share with me, like, what kind of historic sites are you talking about? Like, are you talking about like on the National Mall, like national historic sites, or historic sites that are further away from the city?
Both, all, and we have a list from each of the counties of historic sites. And as a matter of fact, most of the places we put one of our virtual noise monitors at those historic sites. I don't know that I can't promise you that we have all of them covered, but we have a pretty good cross section, I will say, of historic sites. And if there is one in particular or a group in particular that you want considered in this study, please go to the website and drop it in either the survey or an email to us. I think we have the vast majority of them already, but we may have missed something. So please feel free to go to our website, drop us an email, put something in the survey for which ones concern you the most. Absolutely.
All right, anybody else have a comment or a question they wanted to share? All right, well, we're going to continue to encourage folks to fill out the survey, to go to the website to keep an eye on this. And, you know, use that survey to express, you know, your personal experiences. We know that, you know, folks live in these flight paths. We want to understand what you're experiencing, when you're experiencing it. You know, all of the monitors and scientific instruments in the world are not enough for us to really tell what is the experience of this for our residents. So please stay engaged. You know, please be willing to share the experiences that you have with this, your ideas, your concerns. But thank you all so much for coming, and thanks so much to Vianair for, you know, lending their expertise to this. I do see one more question, so I'm going to turn it over to that, but I'm gonna they put the information back up on the screen. We're going to follow up with that, share the recording, share the website, and Shelley Smith has a comment or a question. And you are on mute.
Okay, it's recently been reported that some in Congress want to increase the number of flights at Reagan National, and that might have bearing on the noise as well. Will your working group look at that as in looking at everything else? The impact of increasing it?
Yeah, I mean, we addressed this a little bit. I mean, we can address the impact, but it's not something that is within the control or purview of the work that we're doing right now. I mean, we have had our, you know, administration, our county delegation be very supportive of not having an increase in flights, but that is sort of outside of the scope of this study. You know, we have to deal with what is given. You know, Mr. Allardyce mentioned earlier that the CWG has, you know, tried to limit that. I've had, you know, Cardin has come out against it. Whoever our next senator is, she will likely, you know, I mean, she will come out against it, right, to protect Prince George's County. But that is so that because it's within congressional control, not within something that we can, you know, put forward a recommendation on. Although we can recommend it, it's just, you know, it continues to be that back and forth pressure, and thus far, our delegation has not been able to prevent it from happening slowly but surely.
Okay, thank you. I joined a little late, so I might have missed that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, last call. All right, I think we're gonna wrap this up then, folks. Thanks so much for joining us, and like I said, please stay engaged. Please take the survey, and we will continue to talk about this. And you can always also reach out to the Department of Environment. But we do want to. It's exciting to see this happening, and we appreciate your attention and your input. Thank you.